Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. And the word of the day is unity. In the wake of the U.S. presidential election and all its scandals, a year of using COVID as justification for a massive government and corporate power grab, a summer of rioting, heck, the past 5 years of rioting at various times, over critical race theory, 4 years of women's marches, which were really just pro-abortion, radical feminist protests, the proliferation of corporate sponsorship of LGBT pride, online censorship from so-called fact-checking to complete deplatforming of individuals and removal of apps. After years of being called a racist if you support American values like capitalism and free enterprise and enforcement of existing immigration laws, after years of being called a bigot if you support normative sexuality and the traditional definition of family, we're now being told we need to unify and heal. I don't normally get that political with my channel. I much prefer to talk about philosophy and psychology and theology, all stuff that relates to culture. Those are really things that are upstream of our politics. But this recent call for unity really has me roiled. I had other videos I wanted to do, but I need to talk about this. And I actually believe this serves as a nice intro to a series of videos I want to do next. This call for unity, I just see it as a big joke. Now, we've been living in clown world for a while, so of course it's a joke. And how? How is it a joke? What makes it a problem? And here's the reality. To unify the world, especially the way it's been, would be to enter into a codependent relationship with an abusive narcissist. So first, why are we prone to this codependency? Because we believe that it is safer to be with the abuser than it is to face the dangers of existence. We've been convinced that it's safer here, at least it's predictable. I know when I'm going to be hurt, and I know maybe I can just deal with that. But out there in the world, it's so dangerous. I'd rather be in this controlling, abusive relationship. As the West has strayed more into secular humanism and away from our Judeo-Christian roots, our cultural religion has morphed into moralistic, therapeutic deism. Meaning that, sure, there may be a God, but he's not really involved in our lives, and he doesn't require anything of us. He just wants all people to be happy and nice, to feel safe and comfortable. The goal of life is to find comfort and feel good about yourself. With this worldview, it's inevitable that we would worship safety. I've been saying in my videos that I've been seeing this as a fundamental lack of true fathering. Without the father's equipping and called to face the harsh realities of life, we stay in a state of dependency on our mother's protection and soothing. But eventually we get restless. We hunger for some noble cause to lash against the system we've been consumed by. And thus we get the white knight syndrome, and things like Antifa destroying the Democratic headquarters in Portland. They created a monster, now it's destroying them. We also get things like Trump supporters who believe the law was on our side the whole time, and that the law would protect us from corrupt politicians. And we see them lashing out at the Capitol. Anyway, back to the worship of safety, Safetyism. We can see how it's grown over the past several years. Online policing of social media started in earnest because of the actual problem of online harassment and bullying. And so the anti-bullying movement grew. But combined with intersectionality, they reasoned that it's not just individuals who need protection from mean words, but whole groups of people. Racial minorities, LGBTQ, women, the disabled, fat people. These efforts started with PSAs and people sharing their stories to gain sympathy, movies and TV shows showing a person in plight, and that will win over people already with agreeable and sympathetic temperaments. But what about the less agreeable, or those who are just less interested in caring for others? Like a child appealing to a parent to resolve a sibling dispute, they figured it would be necessary to engineer the social change from the top down. And so the progressives morphed into authoritarians. And they had to make the need seem urgent. So they enlist the priests of the moralistic therapeutic deism religion, the social scientists. Psychologists, counselors, social workers, and professors and authors in the humanities, from departments like women's studies, black studies, queer studies. I call them the priestly caste because their job has been to mediate between marginalized or oppressed people and their God, the state. The psychology world has been peddling in social justice ideology for decades. In the history of psychology, there have been waves in theoretical orientation. The waves have ebbed and flowed between modernism and postmodernism, a conviction that there's objective reality versus the proposition that reality is constructed, between the view that one's problems and solutions lie within oneself and the view that one's problems are from societal forces working against you, and the solution is to engineer society-wide change. This latter set of beliefs is the contention of feminist and black liberation psychology, and of course, gay-affirming therapy. The sexual orientation change therapists have been the canary in the coal mine, brutally ignored and defamed for years. Look at the objections in my videos on therapy for unwanted same-sex attraction. All mental health associations condemn conversion therapy. And yet they cannot provide the evidence that each association did their due diligence in researching the topic, let alone research without bias. You must support the LGBT agenda or you're a pariah in the psych world, or in general now. And though I am a trauma therapist, I easily see how these ideologues in the psych world use trauma as the justification for gross corporate and governmental control. They claim to be about speaking truth to power, but it's all with the assumption that the power is in tradition, in traditional values, and that this power is used to oppress people. They're in complete denial of the fact that traditional values have not been dominant for decades. I mean, if you really want to be a revolutionary, or you want to be a rebel, or go against the grain, be a conservative. Like, we're the ones who are on the outs. And they're ignorant of the reality that traditional values do not oppress. True Christian conservatism actually offers the mercy and healing for the deficits and wounds brought about by our disenchanted, secularized culture. No, the sexual revolutionaries, the cultural Marxists, the critical theorists are the ones that hold sway in our major institutions. They've already been in power. The ideals of diversity, except of thought, inclusion, except of conservatives, and equity, foreseeing outcomes of power and success in so-called oppressed groups to match the dominant group, must never be questioned. But they'll keep railing against the boogeyman so they can maintain support, so they can keep up the delusion of being some virtuous knight fighting against oppression. When you see how this is the philosophy of the world, do you see why I say psychology is the replacement for religious observance? It's our priest in this secularized world. And it's not just any version of secular psychology, not the kind that focuses on insight and self-development. It's the most pernicious. It's a psychology that teaches that people are either oppressors or victims. The victims are traumatized not only by difficulties or abuse, but even just by the norms of life. And so we need a complete overhaul of reality. We need safe spaces and re-education of the masses. It's a psychology built around a narrative of division and power plays. It breeds resentment, entitlement, and a thirst for generational revenge. And that's what's culminated in 2020. So this leads us to the reasons why unifying with the world would be abusive. First, because the world sees everything about power. Look at the prevailing philosophy of the world, critical theory. It's a postmodern, neo-Marxist worldview that puts everyone into identity groups and then an oppression matrix. In their view, someone in a privileged group is participating in oppression, whether they realize it or not, just by being a member of that privileged group. The goal is then to dismantle every norm and reverse the power dynamics. They actually don't want true equality, and they're very resentful. They want to reverse the dynamics. It's a revolution. It's not unity, and it's not justice based on individual merits. And even after the roles are reversed, because of their treasuring of generational offense, they continue to promulgate the victim narrative. This is their philosophy. They may not always state it explicitly, but it is pervasive and insidious. When Ibram X. Kendi, purveyor of so-called anti-racism, which is actually just racism, gets a Netflix deal to indoctrinate children with children programs teaching anti-racism, when more schools are required to teach LGBTQ history, you know that those in power are enacting their agenda. So when these critical theorists, who now hold most positions of leadership, call for unity, I liken it to the Borg in Star Trek calling for assimilation into the hive mind. You're not allowed to think as an individual. You can think and speak only as a representative of the group. And if you veer off script, you will be shunned. Now look at the walk away movement and how they were just deplatformed from social media for the crime of leaving the Democrat Party. Because they view everything from a lens of power, the call for unity is really a demand to submit and conform. And they want to make sure you know resistance is futile. In compassionate communication, we teach a key way to know if someone is making a request versus making a demand. How they respond when the other party doesn't comply. An abuser doesn't make requests. It might have been worded and voiced in a polite manner, but the truth is it was a demand. He or she will use manipulation and violence to force compliance. Someone making a request, however, will accept that you have freedom to make your own choices. They will only seek to protect themselves from your bad choices, not to protect you from your choices. When the call for unity comes from an authority, you know it's really a call for submission. Now that's fine if the authority is God. We should submit to Him. Or even a loving parent. Children should submit to their parents. And that's what the state tries to present itself as, our parent. But it's not. They're in denial of reality. And the reality is that in America, we are a constitutional republic. We have a constitution not to limit the people, but to limit the government's dominance over the people. We're supposed to be for the people, by the people. But over the past 20 years, we've been seeing more and more state overreach. It started with 9/11 and the Patriot Act. It continued with the SOCI, or sexual orientation change efforts, therapy bans, and then transgender bathrooms and sports issues, and now with COVID. And the people consented because of our worship of safety. The saddest revelation I came to in the past year is that people don't cherish and value their liberty like they used to. The thing that made America so unique. They don't really care about it. This brings us to the next problem with the call to unity. Truth does not matter to them. Critical theory is a marriage of postmodernism and Marxist perspectives. Postmodernism is all about the idea that there is no objective truth. We are finding ourselves now in a post-truth world. The only thing that matters is the narrative, which can be constructed. And combined with Marxism, the postmodernists claim that narratives are constructed to secure and use power over others. We can call out hypocrisy, but for the elites and the masses, facts are just a tool for power, and facts can be censored or manipulated to serve the predetermined narrative. Just look at these impeachment charades. The first one was based on Trump doing the very thing that Biden bragged about doing on video, leveraging connections in Ukraine for personal gain. And Trump was seeking to bring him to justice for doing it. So not only did Biden get away with abusing his power, he punished the one trying to bring justice, trying to hold him accountable for it. And this latest one is based on the accusation that Trump incited an insurrection when any objective viewing of his speech at the rally clearly refutes that as utter nonsense. But you see that when everything is about power, the first casualty is truth. To speak plainly about basic reality is now radical, which actually is fine to me when you understand the word radical means to the root. We need to get back to the root meaning of things. True conservatives simply want our societal norms and laws, to an extent, to reflect reality. For example, reproduction is the primary purpose of sexuality, and therefore the sexual union should be limited to a committed, exclusive relational bond called marriage. Gender is rooted in the sexual difference of male and female. The male body is designed for sexual union with the female body. A fertilized egg is a new human life. To willfully end that life is murder. Every child should have the right to his or her biological father and mother, when possible. Children are not a commodity used for self-validation. The family is the essential, sovereign, most basic unit of society. All humans have shared ancestry. There is only one race. Ethnic differences are accidental and independent of a person's worth. All those statements should be apparent to anyone, at least to anyone without a bone to pick with reality. But what we're seeing from the authoritarians, demanding unity, are perpetual efforts to deny and subvert reality. They have a completely incompatible view of reality, an incompatible vision for our country's past, present, and future. How can we unite with people who have a fundamentally different view of reality? We can't. There was a time when we shared common American values, like a free market which makes the U.S. the land of opportunity for those who are willing to work and sacrifice, like freedom of speech, thought, and religion. We once all believed in American exceptionalism. We weren't ashamed of it. But this rising woke social justice movement hates America, Christianity, and Western values like individual liberty, the nuclear family, and equality under the law. They instead want group vengeance, the destruction and redefinition of family, preferably being replaced by the state, and partiality under the law and corporations. True unity comes from complementarity. Jordan Peterson used to argue that the liberals and conservatives need each other. Temperamentally, conservatives are on average more conscientious and concerned with tradition and order, keeping things the same, maintaining the status quo, and keeping things going. While liberals are high in openness and concerned with the inclusion of those in the margins. But the reality is now that the liberals have morphed or evolved into so-called progressives who feel justified in using authoritarian measures to engineer their utopic vision of society. There are few true liberals left. The left has now become the new fundamentalists. They've become their own version of Puritans, intent on compelling everyone to adhere to their new morality using contemporary versions of ancient honor-shame society techniques. But the conservatives have largely stayed the same. If anything, with time, they have shifted more to the left. Peterson's assessment of the complementarity of left and right I also find a bit too simplistic. A secular conservatism is prone to a cold form of orderliness and competitiveness. But the religious do not need liberalism in order to care for the needy, for within their own traditions are the values of mercy and compassion. A true Christian, a conservative Christian, will care for those in need. A religious conservatism will already do what Peterson claims liberals offer, but we will certainly do it in a way grounded in truth. And this is why I think it was likely inevitable that the liberals would morph into woke extremists we see now. So what do? The time for dialogue and conversations is done. Those have only been leading to more concessions. We've been seeing it in the church every time they have a conversation about our view on sexuality. The inevitable result is they make more concessions toward LGBT affirmation. First, we need to find safety away from the abuser. Don't fall for the bait of safetyism. The abuser compels the codependent person to stay in the relationship because they're convinced that there's still some benefit to having the abuser provide protection from the dangers of reality. Now, we need to form our own safe havens. I just finished reading Rod Dreher's new book, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents, in which he tells the stories of Christian survivors of communism, mostly in the former Soviet Union. They survived by unifying as the church, and they had to do it in small groups, and empowering the laity. We cannot be reliant on pastors to do it all for us. They may be in too much danger, or they may be compromised. And they also formed alliances with other non-Christian and non-religious dissidents. We need to understand the distinction, but that shouldn't stop us from reaching out to the atheist that opposes critical theory just as much as us. Several years ago, as I was witnessing the formation of this intellectual dark web and the growing pushback against political correctness coalescing under Jordan Peterson, I was fascinated to see atheists and true classical liberals working together with conservatives. Like, these are some strange bedfellows. So we need to unite with those who share our common vision, at least to whatever extent that we do. And along those lines, I have no interest in uniting with Christians who are woke, who are believing the same stuff as the world. The more they want to be relevant to the world, the less I want anything to do with them, and so should you. Because what can they offer the world? Nothing. They're so concerned with being like the world, and being liked by the world, and getting their woke cookies, as John Cooper says in his podcast, then they're not salt and light anymore. So unify with Christians who have integrity to God's word, to the gospel, to God's standards. More on that in future videos. Next, identify your options if you have agents in your midst. If it's not safe for you to share certain things, you might get in trouble if you're speaking the truth. Now, I have been outspoken for years. I'm not backing down now. It's too late. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. And I'm prepared to accept the consequences of speaking truth. For others, it may not be prudent to be so transparent. I got some friends who say, man, I wish I could be as outspoken as you. But I don't pressure them. I'm like, yeah, you should be. No, it's not always the case for everyone. But they can still maintain integrity in private. That was another thing that stood out to me from Rod Dreher's book, that there were the Christians in the Soviet Union who were just kind of turned off by how outspoken Americans are. They're like, they find that being your true self, being your authentic self, is only possible in private. So I'd say you can be authentic in private. That's just as good. We need both approaches and the wisdom to know when to use them. As Jesus says in Matthew 10:16, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So there will be times where you'll be speaking boldly in front of others, and other times where you'll lay low and live to fight another day. that's fine. And lastly, for now, develop the strength to resist. This comes from a firm foundation of knowing your identity. Not just mentally, like, oh, I know I'm a Christian, but know it communally and behaviorally. Do not forsake the fellowship, the gathering of believers. We need regular reminders of who we are, and we need to pass this down to the next generation. Our children need to be so sure of themselves as followers of God that they are not dependent on the world's approval. When we do these things, and we're faced with a world's call to unity, we will be able to easily say what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? So there you go. There are my thoughts on the world's call for unity. And there's a bit of a hint of where I'll be going in my next videos. If you really want to dig into this more, I highly recommend Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, and Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. So check those out. You won't regret them. Don't forget, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, God bless.